Hey, so most online webinars, training sessions, and events are just really boring. There's not a lot of interactivity, and most people aren't really paying attention. They're busy doing their email in the background. So in this video, I want to walk through two really practical techniques that you can apply today that's going to make your sessions way more interesting, interactive, and engaging, okay? The first thing I'm going to do is to walk through how to put together the presentation session that you deliver. I've broken it down into a 6-step structure that we've tested hundreds of different times and it's gotten some great results. I'm also going to show this applied to a production session that I've been running a whole bunch of times and gotten some great results as well. But the second thing that I want to cover as well is how to keep people watching, right? Because if people don't watch towards the end of your session, then they're not going to consume your call to action. And your call to action is usually when you ask them to do something such as book a call or try out your product, your service, or join your community. So I'm going to show you 3 practical techniques that you can use to keep people engaged, keep people interactive, that significantly increases the likelihood that they stick around to the end of the session. All right? But let's take a step back. A couple of years ago, I realized that most people, when they run these kinds of sessions, have the same basic structure. 45 minutes of teaching and then 15 minutes of Q&A. And it struck me like, why on earth aren't we keeping all of the interactivity elements throughout the entire session? Why are we reserving it just to the end? So that's when I started coming up with the idea of a structure. Now, it didn't start out this way. This is something we tested over and over again on our sessions, on our customers' sessions to see what worked the best, okay? So I'm gonna go through this bit by bit and walk through how this then gets applied into this. Like I said, this is a real production session that I've run a whole bunch of times. Now, this is called the DevRel Kickstart. You don't have to know anything about DevRel. This is just the topic I was teaching. I'll show you how the structure gets applied there. But here's the thing. When people join your webinar, your training session, your event, there's 2 things we have to counteract. The first thing is that they're going to be thinking to themselves, is this worth it? They're going to be like, I've been to a bunch of these sessions in the past. They've kind of sucked. Is this worth an hour of my time? Because asking for an hour of their time is a big ask, right? So we need to counteract that and show them in the first couple of minutes that this is really interesting. The second thing we need to counteract is them thinking, well, who is this person? Why should I listen to you? Like, does your voice even matter in teaching me this stuff? So we need to get over our credibility as well, okay? So this is where we're gonna start out with these first couple of steps. Now, the opening story is really important because a lot of people, what they do is they get on a webinar and they'll be like, welcome to my webinar. In this session, I'm going to go through these 4 or 5 different things. We're going to start out with this, and then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. Boring, not very interesting. We want to start out with a story. Now, what's interesting about stories is that stories by definition are linear, right? They have a start, they have a middle, and they have an end. And what's interesting about stories is that if your story is interesting, so you start telling your story here, people want to listen all the way to the end of the story because they're interested to figure out like how this ends, right? So if you get to the end of the story, first of all, this is way more entertaining and interesting. And then when you start talking about your bio and who you are and why people should listen to you, they're ready to go and they're ready to hear about why you're a credible source in the topic that you're teaching, okay? Now let me show you how this is applied inside of the DevRel Kickstart session that I'm going to use as an example. Let me just grab my keyboard here to make this a little bit easier, okay? So again, you don't have to know about the topic of this particular session, but I'm teaching people how to basically engage with developers more effectively, right? That's the target audience. So what I first of all did is I told a story about how a company called GitLab that's very successful responded to a pretty disastrous situation that impacted a lot of developers, but they did it in a very open and transparent way. So I kind of go through this and tell the story, and I'm showing screenshots of Twitter at the time to kind of tell this story. And then it kind of culminates in, this, by behaving and engaging in this kind of way, you can see the impact on Google Trends of just how their brand grew and grew and grew, right? So it tells this story, right? And that's the first step, right? So again, when we've tested this a whole bunch of times, what we've seen is people keep watching because they're like, I want to figure out how this ends. The key thing here is that the story is obviously, it's got to be interesting. If it's boring, then people are not going to be interested in it. If you want to test this, just go and ask some people who you know, like, oh, think about telling this story at the beginning of this webinar training session. Do you think this is interesting? And then just test it. And what you can do with most webinar platforms is you can see like where the drop off is. Like if you see people dropping off in the first minute or so, your story's boring, switch it out for another one, okay? Now, over here, after this slide, we ask a question. I'm going to come back to this later on. This is one of those 3 techniques that we use to keep people interacting and engaging. So hang fire on that one. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But now what we want to do is want to kind of go through the bio piece. Now this is the way I present it, right? I basically say, So you might be thinking, who is this dude who sounds kind of British, but also kind of American? And let's be honest, who's got a bit of a stupid beard, right? Now I'm doing two things here. What I'm doing is I'm being a little self-deprecating and humorous and trying to loosen the atmosphere. But what I'm doing is I'm introducing the idea of me telling you who I am and why you should listen to me. And then what I do is just very easily, I just go through and, you know, talk a little bit about my background, some of the work that I've done. I talk about some of the books that I've worked on. And then I also talk about some of the companies we work with in the Community Leadership Core. And I just very, very briefly mention the Community Leadership Core. I don't sell it. I'm not trying to sell it here. If I try to sell it here, people are going to turn away, right? So it's just a couple of slides. This takes about a minute, maybe 75 seconds to kind of go through all of this. Now you might be thinking, but I haven't published books and maybe I haven't been in my career as long as you have, Jono. Doesn't matter. Just put anything down here where you can talk about some of your accomplishments and what you've been doing, or your company's accomplishments if you're doing this as part of your company. Okay? Okay, so we've now got the opening story in the bio. We're off to the races. Now someone's thinking, oh, this is more interesting than I was expecting because of the story, and this person seems credible, okay? Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the promise. Now the purpose of this is you want to think about like when you go to a restaurant, right? When you go to a restaurant, they give you a menu, and the purpose of the menu is not only for you to pick kind of what you want to eat, but it's also to kind of whet your appetites, to get you hungry, right? And in some restaurants, you'll see like a dessert card, or you may see, you know, fresh fish on display, or whatever it might be. So what we want to do is we want to tease our audience and say, like, these are the 3 things that I'm going to promise you that I'm going to deliver inside of the session today that's going to be really useful. And we call these the 3 secrets, right? Now, I don't know what it is about humans, but for some reason, we tend to think in 3s, right? I don't know why it is, but 3 is just a nice round number that we tend to think of, okay? So what we're gonna do here is share, these are the 3 things that we're gonna cover inside of this session, right? So I'm gonna go down, and I do it like this. So I say, okay, so you've joined this session. We're gonna be talking about how to do DevRel really well. And to me, there's 3 ingredients in how we do this effectively. The first is that we gotta get really clear on who our target audience is. So we're gonna figure out how to do that and figure out what the right audience is for you and your project or your company. The second thing we need is to have a really durable approach that we're going to use to build a simple, low friction, high value developer experience. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to like really focus on action and get the things that we learn in this session applied and up and running, right? So the reason why we do this is because if you can wow somebody with the first secret, which in this case is audience, and they're like, wow, this is really useful, then they might think to themselves, well, you know what? I think I'm going to stick around for the second secret. I think I'm going to learn, I'd like to see what that's like. And then they start listening to the second one, and now they're thinking, well, I'm kind of most of the way through the hour now. I might as well stick around for the third one. And then boom, they're engaged. They're kind of with you, okay? So this is the reason why it's really important to break this down into 3 different pieces, okay? And what I like to do, in fact, I'll do this again, is I'll show the 3 of them, right? And then I'll say, okay, why don't we get started with our first, the first thing we're gonna cover today. I don't call these secrets in the session. I think it's a bit cheesy, but that's kind of how I like to think of it in my head, is these are the secrets to success in whatever we're doing here, okay? So this is where we've got up to this particular point. Now, if you're finding this useful, a like on this video would be amazing, because this is a small YouTube channel. I've been working really hard to try and make the best videos that I can, and a like makes a huge difference on this channel. So if you wouldn't mind giving me a like in this video if you're finding this useful, that would be amazing. A sub to the channel would be absolutely awesome. You would make my day. All right, so let's now move on to the next piece here, which is the meat of the session. So this is basically where you deliver all of your stuff. And you know, if we go back to my my session over here, you know, this is where I'm not going to go through all of this because it's all to do with developer engagement and you might not be interested in that. But this is all of the meat, and you can see, hang on, let me go back up. You can see here, this is where I'm starting the second secret, kind of going through this. Yes, that was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Your eyes weren't deceiving you. This is where I talk about the third secret. So this is kind of where we go through all these different pieces. Now, what's critical about this is it's got to be really practical. It's got to be useful, and don't beat around the bush. Just kind of get to the meat of what you're talking about. You want people to be learning things that they can then easily take away and apply right there and then. Okay, that's the ideal scenario. Now, again, we're going to come back a little bit later on because I'm going to talk about frameworks and examples as key things that you're going to want to include as we go through this section. Okay, but let's now take a look at the call to action. Now, what is a call to action? A call to action is something you want your audience to do at the end of your webinar, your training session, your event, okay? So typically the reason why businesses usually run these kinds of sessions is because you run an event like this, you're giving a lot of value away for free, it doesn't cost people anything. And then you hope that it kind of ingratiates you with your audience, so then they'll want to kind of take the next step, which might be booking a call with you, it might be trying your product, it might be signing up for your product or your service, it might be downloading a free version of your product, or using the free tier, it might be joining your community, whatever that call to action might be. Now you're going to want to think about what your call to action should be before you put all of this stuff together, right? Because it's really important that we can present this in a really natural way. But if you get to, this portion, right? I'm 59 slides in. If I get to this point and then I just immediately say, in my case with this session, it was my call to action was to book a call with me if people are interested in the community leadership core. If I was to just say, now, let me talk about the community leadership core, I want you to go and book a call, you can go and do it here, you would not get anyone booking it, right? It's too abrupt. So what we need here is we need something called a bridge. A bridge is where you take them from where they were to where you want to get them towards the offer, right? So the bridge is, they've learned all this great stuff in the session. You're going to talk about and tempt them with kind of what you're offering. In my case, it's the community leadership core. And then you're going to present the call to action, which in my case is them booking a call with me to talk about the community leadership core. So this bridge is critically important, and a lot of people screw this up. But the good news is that it's really simple to do. Because if you think about it, where we are here, you have taught a whole bunch of material throughout these 3 secrets, right? And you're credible because you had your bio. But so what we're going to do, and this is the way I do it. In fact, what I'll do is I'll present this, right? So this is how I would do it in the session. So I'd say, okay, so we've been through these 3 different areas of how to build amazing developer engagement. And you're probably thinking to yourself, oh my God, that is a lot of stuff, right? That's so many different ideas of what I could be doing and where I should be focusing on. And you might be kind of stuck on where to get started. So you might be thinking to yourself, how do I measure the right things, right? You talked about metrics earlier on, but what should I focus on? How do I prioritize and manage the work? There's probably 100 things I could do from this session, but what do I do first? How do I solve problems really quickly? How do I show results to my leadership, to my executives? How do I handle the uncertainty? Like, I'm not entirely sure which step forward I should do with this or that. How do I feel inspired? Like when I wake up in the morning and I've had a bad night's sleep and I'm not feeling very inspired for the day, how do I get inspired, right? So these are, important questions. And, over the years of me working with all these different companies that I mentioned earlier on, one of the things that I focused on is really trying to understand and distill how we build great engagement by breaking it into a simple set of approaches that we can apply. And this is something we've built into our company called the Community Leadership Core that's resulted in results like this one for Dragonfly, this one for Loft Labs, this one for STEM Learning. And we work with a whole bunch of different companies to help them to really take everything we've talked about today and make it really easy to apply. And this is called the Community Leadership Core, right? So at that point, I've made the bridge, right? Started out as, we've taught you all this kind of stuff. You probably feel a bit overwhelmed. These are the kind of questions you've got. Here is the pathway that I took to building the Community Leadership Core. And this is where I think it might be helpful. And then what I do usually at this particular point is I'll say, so if you don't mind, I'm going to give you just like a 5-minute overview of what this is. It might be useful to some of you. It might not be useful to some of you as well, but just want to kind of put it on your radar. By me saying that, by the way, I'm not making anyone feel a level of commitment. It's very casual, right? And then it gives me kind of an open door to go and talk about the product, right? So what I do then is I go through and I talk about what the Community Leadership Core is. I'm not going to kind of go through that for you right now. So I go through this, and then this CTA offer that we've got down here, the way in which I present this is I basically pop up this little green button over here, right? So let me show you, right? So if you remember rightly, I said earlier on, and these are some of the companies I've worked with. So we've built something called the Community Leadership Core, right? And the Community Leadership Core, we're kind of like a personal trainer for tech companies who want to build developer growth or community growth and engagement every single quarter, right? If you think about a personal trainer, what they do is they do 3 things. The first thing is they help to give you clarity on like what should you be working on, what's going to have the biggest impact, how do I make the best use of my time. The second thing is coaching. They They will help you to make sure that they'll watch you and how you lift weights and to do them safely and to make sure that they're as efficient as possible. We do the same thing with companies to help them do the most impactful work and to make sure that they're doing that as efficiently as possible. And then the third thing is consistency, is that a good personal trainer will show up. They'll hold you accountable. We do the same thing with our companies. We don't just like a consultant give you information, then go down the pub. We actually check in and make sure that things are progressing forward. So that's how I'm kind of presenting what the Community Leadership Core is, okay? And by the way, if you're interested in the Community Leadership Core, you can see a link down there in the video description where you can go and find out more. We don't just work with developer companies, by the way. We work with all kinds of different companies. But anyway, the way in which I then present the offer is I'll say, so I'm gonna give you like a quick 5-minute overview of what this is. If you think this is kind of interesting, you'd like to figure out whether it's a good fit for you, you can see a link in the sidebar where you can go and book a call. Just click on that link, click on that button, and then it'll take you to a page. You can go and pick a time that works well for you. We'll book a 15-minute call. It'll be you and I. It's not going to be you working with somebody else. And let's go and see if it's a good fit for you. All right? So that's how you do it. So, you know, it's a pretty straightforward structure, you know. Open with the story, quick bio, so you show your credibility, promise 3 things that you're going to give them that's really exciting, go and actually teach them that stuff, bridge to your product, to your service, or what you want people to be interested in, and then provide in a non-threatening way that particular offer, okay? Now, what's really important, and this is where I kind of want to bring this video into a little bit of a close, is keeping people watching throughout the entire session. So I mentioned this earlier on, that if you can't keep them watching, then you're going to lose them, right? So what I want to do, I'm just going to pull something up over here, right? One sec. Okay. So there's 3 things I want to recommend here that you should focus on to keep people engaging throughout the session, okay? The first one are frameworks. This is where you make it really easy for people to get to a particular outcome or conclusion. Now, I tend to think in frameworks. I tend to like to break things down into a simple way of implementing it. And if you want an example of a framework, it's this, right? This is 6 steps. You follow each step, and then you end up with an optimized presentation. So that's an example of a framework. Let me give you an example of this applied into the actual session here. Let me find it, one sec. So here's an example. When I'm talking about how to build an audience, what I say is, how we build a relationship with an audience, it's pretty simple. We identify who's our target audience, we deliver quick wins for them to solve their problems, and then this results in value. Now, this might seem painfully simple, but it's a very, very simple way of explaining that if you know who you're talking to, you can figure out what problems they've got, and you can solve those problems with very quick wins, and you do that over and over and over and over again, you start building value in that particular audience, okay? So frameworks is the first thing. Go and litter your session with frameworks, right? I will give you another example. This is kind of the framework that I go through in the session, where I show, and you know, I'm kind of overlay, my video feed is kind of covering some of this, but this is kind of where I walk through, one second, hang on, where I kind of walk through my framework for how to build and nurture engagement with people, right? So whatever your framework is, make sure, whatever you're teaching, break it down into simple steps, package it up into frameworks. The second thing that you're going to want to focus on here is going to be examples. People really think in terms of examples. This is a mistake that I made for many years in my career. I didn't really realize that examples were so critical. So for example, no pun intended, if I go back to the beginning, I start out my session with an example, which is GitLab, right? When I'm further down here, these are examples of communities that I talk through, right? These are examples of companies who've been doing great developer engagement. I'm referencing Seth Godin here, right? So these are all different examples that I can apply. These are examples of how to implement some of the stuff that I'm talking about. These are examples of incentives. Examples really make a huge difference, right? So pepper examples throughout your session. And then the third one here, and this is really important, is interactivity, right? Is you want to regularly throughout your session be interacting with your audience. And the best way to do this is to ask them questions. So let me go back to my deck, and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about here, right? So at the beginning, when I go through this story about GitLab, right, I then say to them, so does this story give you a positive impression of GitLab? And I say to people, go and type it into the chat. Yes, no, feel free to get creative. Say we, yeah, absolutely, hell yeah, whatever it might be. Go get it into the chat. So they go through. And now they're interacting. They can see other people interacting. Now the session's more interesting to them. And what you want to do is pepper these question slides throughout your session. So let me go and find the next one. Hang on. You don't want them too often, but this one, does this make it easier for you to figure out what your target developer audience wants, right? Let's go and find the next one. What is a developer lead magnet idea that you'd like to try? So this is why I'm actually asking people to brainstorm and share a bunch of things that they've tried. You don't have to worry what a lead magnet is. This is something that I teach in this particular session, right? But that kind of interactivity keeps people engaging. So at least every 4 or 5 minutes as you're going through, ask your audience a question and ask them to respond in the chat. It massively impacts the level of interest, the level of engagement. And then when combined with this structure, well, boom, you're going to be off to the races. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, that's kind of a lot, Jono. Where do I get started, right? Well, the most important thing is to start this just with the right mindset. And the right mindset is what we call progress over perfection. We talk to our customers all the time about this. If you go and check out this video over here, I'm going to walk through exactly what progress over perfection really is. What does it mean? And why is it going to absolutely change the quality of your work and how active you are, okay? So go check out that video over there. I think it's going to be one of the best videos you watch today, if I say so myself. Not because it's the best video in the world, just because I think you'll find it will put you in the right mindset for doing amazing work. So go check that out, and I'll see you there.